Marcus Whitmore was a billionaire, feared in boardrooms. But 10 years ago, he did something so monstrous it stole his sleep every night. He abandoned his disabled 5-year-old son in the depths of the Ocala Forest, and lied to the boy's mother with a story so elaborate it fooled everyone. Today, on the anniversary of that sin, someone steps out from between the trees. A teenager, wearing the same leg braces he left behind. Stay with this story, the truth will shake you to the core. Hi, my wonderful family. It's good to share another reality story of life with you again. As always, I want to ask you to please like, share, subscribe to this channel, and comment. I am with you, Mr. Reality. Now, let's delve into the story. The Spanish moss hung like grey curtains from the live oaks, swaying gently in the humid Florida breeze. It was a landscape both beautiful and haunting, where luxury waterfront estates stood mere miles from dense, untamed wilderness. In this world of stark contrasts lived Marcus Whitmore, a man whose wealth could buy almost anything except the one thing he wanted most: freedom from his own conscience. Marcus had built an empire from nothing. Starting with a single real estate investment in his 20s, he had transformed himself into one of Florida's most influential billionaires by 45. His company, Whitmore Global Developments, had reshaped the Tampa skyline and stretched its influence across the southeast. But behind the gleaming facade of success lay a secret so dark that Marcus had spent a decade trying to bury it beneath layers of charitable donations, public appearances, and carefully constructed lies. 10 years ago, Marcus had been married to Sarah, a kindergarten teacher he had met at a charity gala. She had been different from the socialites who usually orbited his world. Sarah had genuine warmth, a laugh that came from her soul, and a way of seeing good in everyone, even in Marcus during his most ruthless business dealings. When she told him she was pregnant, Marcus had felt something he rarely experienced: pure, uncomplicated joy. Their son Daniel was born on a rain-soaked April morning. From the first moment Marcus held that tiny, perfect child, he felt his heart crack open in ways he didn't know were possible. Daniel had Sarah's bright green eyes and a smile that seemed to illuminate whatever room he occupied. For 3 years, Marcus allowed himself to believe he could have it all: the empire, the family, the legacy. But then came the diagnosis that shattered everything. Daniel had been struggling to walk properly, falling more than other children his age. The doctors ran tests, did scans, consulted specialists. The final verdict came like a death sentence: a rare degenerative condition affecting Daniel's legs and spine. The prognosis was grim. Daniel would never walk normally. He would need extensive care, multiple surgeries, years of therapy. He would be, in the doctor's clinical terminology, severely disabled. Marcus's father, Richard Whitmore, had built the foundation of their family fortune, and with it, a legacy of ruthless pragmatism. Weakness is contagious, Richard had told Marcus throughout his childhood. You show weakness, and the world devours you. When Richard learned of Daniel's condition, he called Marcus into his study, poured 2 glasses of bourbon, and delivered an ultimatum that would haunt Marcus forever. You have a choice, son, Richard had said, his voice cold as winter steel. You can let this crippled child destroy everything we've built. Or you can be strong enough to do what's necessary. Your business partners, your investors, they all watch you. They see you raising a disabled child, pouring resources into a lost cause, and they start wondering if you've gone soft. Soft doesn't survive in our world. Marcus had argued, had shouted, had even thrown that glass of bourbon across the room. But Richard's words had found the dark, ambitious part of Marcus's soul and taken root there like poison oak. Over the following months, as Daniel's condition worsened and the medical bills mounted, Marcus began to see his son differently. Where once he saw a beautiful child who needed love and support, he now saw a liability, a weakness, a crack in his armor. Sarah noticed the change in Marcus, the way he avoided spending time with Daniel, the coldness that crept into his eyes when Daniel needed help getting up after a fall. They fought about it constantly, Sarah's voice breaking as she pleaded with Marcus to see their son as a blessing, not a burden. But Marcus had made his choice, and his father had helped him devise a plan so cruel that it could only have been born from the darkest corners of the human heart. The story Marcus told Sarah was carefully crafted. He had found an exclusive treatment facility in Switzerland, he said, where experimental procedures had shown remarkable results for conditions like Daniel's. The doctors there were pioneering new techniques, but the treatment required Daniel to stay at the facility for an extended period, possibly years. It would be difficult, Marcus explained with practiced sympathy, but it was Daniel's best chance at a normal life. Sarah had been skeptical at first, but Marcus had shown her fabricated medical journals, fake testimonials, even a professionally designed website for the fictional facility. He had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on the lie, money that meant nothing to him but bought everything he wanted. Sarah's trust and a clear path to rid himself of the son he now saw as a burden. The day they took Daniel away, Sarah had held him so tightly that Marcus thought she might never let go. 5-year-old Daniel, confused and frightened, clung to his mother, his small voice asking why he had to leave, promising he would be good, begging to stay home. Sarah had cried so hard she could barely speak the words of goodbye. Marcus had watched from a distance, his jaw clenched, forcing himself to feel nothing. But Marcus hadn't taken Daniel to Switzerland. He had driven his son 3 hours north to the Ocala National Forest, a vast wilderness of pine, flatwoods and scrub, where the trees grew so thick that sunlight barely touched the forest floor. He had parked his car on an old logging road, far from any hiking trail or campsite. Daniel, exhausted from crying, had fallen asleep in his car seat, his cheeks still wet with tears. Marcus had carried his sleeping son deep into the forest, his small body so light in his arms. Daniel's leg braces, which helped him walk with assistance, gleamed in the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy. Marcus had found a clearing, a small open space surrounded by palmetto bushes and pine trees. He had laid Daniel down on a bed of pine needles, placed a bottle of water beside him, and stood there for what felt like an eternity, looking down at his abandoned child. For just a moment, Marcus had wavered. Daniel stirred in his sleep, reached out his small hand and murmured, "Daddy?" The word had pierced Marcus like a knife, and he had actually stepped forward, ready to pick his son up and take him home. But then he heard his father's voice in his head, saw the empire he had built, imagined the whispers and the pity and the slow erosion of his power, and he turned away. Marcus had walked back to his car and driven away, leaving his 5-year-old disabled son alone in hundreds of thousands of acres of wilderness. He told himself that a park ranger would find Daniel quickly, that the boy would be taken to a hospital and then foster care, that he would live, but live far away from Marcus's life. It was abandonment, yes, but not murder. That distinction was the lie Marcus told himself so he could sleep at night. But Marcus hadn't counted on finding sleep nearly impossible for the next 10 years. He told Sarah that Daniel was settling in at the facility in Switzerland, that the doctors were optimistic that she would be able to visit soon. He showed her photoshopped pictures of a child who resembled Daniel standing in front of alpine mountains. He hired an actor to occasionally call Sarah, pretending to be Daniel's therapist, delivering updates on fictional progress. The lies became a second life, exhausting and elaborate, but Marcus maintained them because the alternative was facing what he had truly done. Sarah began to change after Daniel left. The light in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a perpetual sadness that no amount of wealth or distraction could alleviate. She threw herself into her teaching, spending long hours at the school, often crying in her classroom when she thought no one could hear. Marcus tried to comfort her, tried to be the supportive husband, but his touch felt hollow, his words empty. How could he comfort her grief when he was its source? 2 years after Daniel's abandonment, Sarah discovered the truth by accident. She had been organizing Marcus's study when she found a file folder hidden in his desk, containing records of the money he had paid to create the fictional Swiss facility, along with notes in his father's handwriting outlining the plan. The confrontation that followed was volcanic. Sarah had screamed at Marcus with a fury he didn't know she possessed, demanding to know where their son really was, threatening to call the police, the FBI, anyone who would listen. Marcus had broken down, confessing everything through tears that came too late to matter. He told her about the forest, about abandoning Daniel, about the lies he had constructed. Sarah had looked at him with such disgust, such pure hatred, that Marcus felt something inside him wither and die. She had indeed called the police, who launched an investigation and extensive search of the Ocala National Forest. For weeks, search parties combed through the wilderness, but they found nothing. No body, no clothing, no trace of Daniel Whitmore. The investigators concluded that Daniel had likely perished within days of being abandoned, his body consumed by the forest's natural processes or wild animals. 5-year-old children, especially disabled ones, simply did not survive alone in such harsh conditions. Marcus was arrested and charged with child abandonment and reckless endangerment, resulting in death. But his team of expensive lawyers managed to reduce the charges through technicalities and lack of physical evidence. He served 18 months in a minimum security facility and emerged to a world that remembered his crime but was willing to look away for the right price. Sarah divorced him the day he was arrested and left Florida entirely, moving to Oregon to live with her sister. Marcus heard she had become a shadow of her former self, unable to teach anymore, barely able to function. She blamed herself for trusting Marcus, for not insisting on visiting Daniel sooner, for not seeing the monster she had married. Marcus had destroyed her as thoroughly as he had destroyed their son, and that knowledge was a weight he carried every waking moment. Richard Whitmore had been right about one thing: Marcus's reputation had taken a severe hit. Half his business partners had distanced themselves from him, several major deals had fallen through, and the Whitmore name, once synonymous with success, now carried the stench of scandal. But the other half, the ones who valued profit over morality, had stayed. Marcus rebuilt his empire, smaller and more cautious, but still substantial. He poured himself into work, into acquisitions and developments, into anything that might distract him from the memories that haunted his nights. But the guilt never left. It grew instead, feeding on his sleepless nights and his hollow days, transforming into something that poisoned every moment of his existence. Marcus began having dreams where Daniel was still alive, wandering through the forest, calling for his father. He started making anonymous donations to children's hospitals and disability advocacy groups, as if money could somehow balance the scales of what he had done. He knew it couldn't, knew that nothing could, but he did it anyway because doing nothing felt even worse. 10 years passed. Marcus was now 55, his hair shot through with grey, his face lined with the evidence of a decade of guilt. His father had died 5 years earlier, taking with him whatever twisted logic had justified abandoning Daniel. Marcus had stood at Richard's funeral, feeling nothing but relief that the old man was gone, unable to forgive him for the poison he had planted in Marcus's soul. On the anniversary of the day he had abandoned Daniel, Marcus did what he did every year. He drove to the Ocala National Forest, parked near the old logging road, and hiked into the wilderness. He could never find the exact clearing where he had left his son. The forest looked the same in every direction, an endless maze of pine and palmetto. But he went anyway, sitting on the forest floor, talking to the ghost of his son, apologizing to the trees and the sky and whatever might be listening. This year was different. This year, as Marcus sat in a clearing he thought might be the right one, he heard something. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, the sound of someone moving through the underbrush with practiced ease. Marcus stood, his heart pounding, expecting a park ranger or a hiker. What he saw instead made his legs buckle, made the world tilt sideways, made him question his sanity. A young man emerged from between the trees. He was perhaps 15 years old, tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and hair bleached lighter by years of sun exposure. He wore clothes that appeared to be a patchwork of different fabrics, stitched together with remarkable skill. On his legs were Daniel's braces, worn and modified but still recognizable, covered in carved symbols and decorations. But it was the face that stopped Marcus's heart. Sarah's green eyes, set in features that were unmistakably a teenage version of the 5-year-old he had abandoned. "Daniel," Marcus whispered, the name emerging as barely a breath. The young man studied Marcus with an intensity that was unnerving, his head tilted slightly, like an animal evaluating potential danger. When he spoke, his voice was rough, as if he hadn't used it much, but the words were clear. "You're the man from my memories, the one who left me here." Marcus fell to his knees, a sound escaping his throat that was half sob, half moan. "You're alive! Oh God, you're alive! How? How is this possible?" Daniel took a step closer, his gait still uneven but remarkably efficient, given the severity of his childhood condition. "I cried for 3 days," he said, his voice flat, recounting facts without emotion. "I called for you and Mom until my voice broke. I thought you were coming back. I didn't understand why you left me." The words were knives, each one finding its target in Marcus's chest. "Daniel, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. What I did was unforgivable. But please, please tell me how you survived." Daniel sat down on a fallen log, his movements graceful despite the braces. He looked at Marcus with those heartbreaking green eyes, Sarah's eyes, and began to speak. "After the first few days, when I realized no one was coming, I started to understand that I had to save myself. I couldn't walk far, and I was so hungry. I found a stream and drank water. I ate berries, even though some made me sick. I was scared of everything. The sounds at night, the darkness, the animals I could hear moving through the trees." Marcus listened, tears streaming down his face, unable to speak, unable to do anything but bear witness to the suffering he had caused. "Then I met James," Daniel continued. "He was a homeless veteran, living off the grid deep in the forest. He had PTSD from the war, couldn't handle being around people anymore. He found me collapsed by the stream, too weak to move. He could have left me, probably should have, but he didn't." Daniel's expression softened for the first time, a ghost of a smile crossing his features. "James saved my life. He carried me back to his camp, fed me, took care of me. When I told him my name and that my father had left me here, he didn't ask questions. He just said, 'Guess you're stuck with me now, kid.' James taught me everything: how to find food, how to build shelter, how to purify water, how to survive. He modified my braces so I could move through the forest easier. He taught me to read, using old books he had scavenged. He became the father you never were." The words were delivered without malice, just simple truth, which made them hurt even more. Marcus couldn't stop crying, couldn't catch his breath. "Where is he now? James? I need to thank him. I need to." "He died 2 years ago," Daniel interrupted. "Heart attack. I buried him under the big oak tree where we had our camp. He was the best man I've ever known, and he's gone because life isn't fair." Daniel's voice cracked slightly, the first sign of emotion breaking through his careful control. "Before he died, he made me promise to practice talking to people, to not become as isolated as he had been. He wanted me to eventually rejoin society, but I wasn't ready. I'm still not sure I am." Marcus wanted to reach out to his son, to embrace him, but he had no right. He had forfeited every right the moment he drove away 10 years ago. "Daniel, please, come home. Let me make this right. I know I can't undo what I did, but I can give you the life you should have had. You can have anything you want, everything you need." "I don't want your money," Daniel said sharply. "James lived on almost nothing, and he was richer in spirit than you could ever be. He showed me that strength isn't about power or wealth. It's about surviving when you have every reason to give up. It's about choosing kindness when the world has been cruel." Daniel stood, preparing to leave. "I've watched you come here every year, talking to yourself, crying. Part of me wanted to hurt you, to make you feel even a fraction of the pain you caused. But James taught me that revenge is just drinking poison and hoping the other person dies. So I'm not here for revenge." "Then why?" Marcus asked desperately. "Why reveal yourself now?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, looking up at the canopy above them, where sunlight filtered through the pine needles in golden shafts. "Because James told me before he died that I was carrying anger that would eventually destroy me. He said I needed to confront you, to see you as what you really are, just a weak, broken man who made terrible choices. He said I needed to decide whether to let what you did define my life or whether to choose something better. I want to choose something better," Daniel continued, "but I need to hear you say it. I need you to look at me and tell me the truth about why you did it. Not the excuses, not the justifications. The real reason you left your disabled 5-year-old son to die in the forest." Marcus felt as though he were being torn apart from the inside. Every instinct screamed at him to lie, to soften the truth, to make himself seem less monstrous. But Daniel deserved the truth, the ugly, unvarnished truth. "I was a coward," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "My father convinced me that you were a weakness, a liability that would destroy everything I had built. I believed him because it was easier than being brave. I chose my empire over my son. I chose comfort over love. I told myself I was being pragmatic, being strong, but the truth is I was just weak and selfish and evil." "I don't expect you to forgive me," Marcus continued. "I don't even forgive myself. Every day for 10 years I have woken up knowing I'm a monster. I destroyed your mother. I destroyed you. I destroyed the man I could have been. And I did it all for an empire that feels like dust in my hands." Daniel nodded slowly, processing Marcus's words. "You want to know the funny thing?" he said. "Being abandoned, surviving in this forest, it made me strong in ways I never would have been otherwise. My legs still don't work right, probably never will, but I can hike 20 miles a day. I can climb trees that would terrify most people. I can start a fire in the rain, find food where others would starve, navigate by the stars. James taught me that disability is only limiting if you let it be. I'm not grateful for what you did," Daniel clarified. "What you did was evil. But I've realized that I can't let your evil define me. I survived, I'm strong, I'm capable. And I'm going to live a life that honors James's memory, not one consumed by hating you." Marcus felt something shift inside him, a tiny spark of hope he didn't deserve. "What will you do now?" he asked. "I don't know yet," Daniel admitted. "James wanted me to rejoin society eventually. Maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll find a way to use what I've learned to help others. Maybe I'll work with search and rescue, help find people lost in the wilderness. Maybe I'll just keep living out here. I haven't decided." "Can I help?" Marcus asked, knowing the answer but needing to ask anyway. "Can I do anything to make your life better?" Daniel shook his head. "I don't want anything from you except this. Find my mother. Tell her I'm alive. Tell her I love her, and I don't blame her for any of this. Tell her I'm okay, that I survived, that I'm strong. She deserves to know that." The request hit Marcus like a physical blow. Facing Sarah, telling her that Daniel had been alive all these years while she tortured herself with guilt, would be its own form of hell. But it was what Daniel wanted, what Sarah deserved. "I'll find her," Marcus promised. "I'll tell her everything. And Daniel, I know you don't want to hear this, but I need to say it. I love you. I never stopped loving you, even when I did the most unlovable thing imaginable. That doesn't excuse anything, doesn't change anything. But it's true." Daniel looked at his father, really looked at him, and Marcus saw something in those green eyes. Not forgiveness, not love, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. James used to say that people are capable of both terrible evil and incredible good, sometimes in the same person. I think he was right. What you did was terrible, but at least you admit it. At least you don't pretend to be anything other than what you are. Daniel turned to leave, his modified braces making soft clicking sounds against the forest floor. He paused at the edge of the clearing and looked back. Maybe someday I'll be ready to know you as more than the man who abandoned me. But that day isn't today. Fine, Mom. Tell her the truth. That's the only thing you can do for me now." And then he was gone, melting back into the forest with a grace that spoke of years spent learning its secrets. Marcus stood alone in the clearing, feeling as though he had been both destroyed and somehow remade. His son was alive. After 10 years of believing Daniel was dead, of living with the crushing guilt of having murdered his own child, he was alive. Marcus spent the next 3 weeks tracking down Sarah. She was living in a small apartment in Portland, working part-time at a library, her life a shadow of what it once was. When Marcus knocked on her door, she opened it, saw him, and the color drained from her face. "Get out," she said, her voice cold. "You have no right to be here." "Sarah, please," Marcus said. "I have news about Daniel. He's alive." The words hung in the air between them. Sarah's face went through a dozen emotions in seconds: shock, disbelief, hope, rage. "You're lying," she finally said. "The police searched for weeks. They said he couldn't have survived." "You're lying to hurt me even more." "I saw him," Marcus insisted. "He's alive. He survived. A veteran named James found him and raised him in the forest. He's 15 now, Sarah. He's strong and capable and alive, and he wanted me to tell you that he loves you and that he doesn't blame you for anything." Sarah collapsed against the doorframe, her legs unable to hold her up. Marcus caught her, and for the first time in 10 years she let him touch her. She was sobbing, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. "My baby," she kept saying. "My baby is alive." Marcus told her everything. How he had found Daniel, what Daniel had told him, how the boy had survived against impossible odds. Sarah listened, her hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. When Marcus finished, she looked at him with eyes that held both desperate hope and lingering hatred. "I need to see him," she said. "Where is he?" "He's in the Ocala National Forest," Marcus said. "But Sarah, he's not ready. He specifically said he wasn't ready to rejoin society yet. He's still processing everything, still grieving James. We have to give him time." "Time?" Sarah's voice rose to a scream. "I've lost 10 years with my son because of you. I thought he was dead. You don't get to tell me I need to give him time." "I know," Marcus said quietly. "You're right. But this is what Daniel wants. He asked me to tell you he's alive, that he's okay, and that he'll come to you when he's ready. We have to respect his wishes." Over the following months, Sarah moved back to Florida, renting a house in Ocala, as close to the forest as she could get. She would hike into the wilderness every day, calling Daniel's name, leaving notes and supplies at various locations, hoping he would find them. Marcus funded a private investigator to try to locate Daniel's camp, but the forest was vast, and Daniel knew how to avoid being found. Then, 6 months after Marcus's encounter with Daniel, something remarkable happened. Sarah received a letter delivered to her house by mail with no return address. Inside, in careful handwriting, was a message from Daniel. "Mom," it read, "I've been watching you walk through the forest. I see how much you love me, how hard you're trying to find me. I'm not ready yet, but I'm working on it. James taught me that healing takes time. Please be patient. I'm learning to trust again. I love you. I always have. Daniel." Sarah slept with that letter under her pillow, read it dozens of times a day, cried over it with a mixture of joy and sorrow. More letters came, one every few weeks, each one slightly longer, each one revealing a bit more about Daniel's life and thoughts. He told her about James, about survival skills he had learned, about books he had read, about his fear of rejoining a world he barely remembered. Marcus, for his part, began the painful process of dismantling the empire he had valued more than his son. He sold off major portions of his business, donated huge sums to charities supporting disabled children and homeless veterans. He established a foundation in James's name, dedicated to helping veterans struggling with PTSD. It wasn't redemption. Marcus knew he could never be redeemed. But it was something, a way to honor the man who had shown Daniel the love and care that Marcus had failed to provide. A year after the first letter, Daniel finally emerged from the forest. Sarah received a call from a park ranger station saying that a young man claiming to be her son was there, asking for her. Sarah drove faster than she ever had in her life, Marcus following behind in his own car, both of them terrified that this was a dream, that Daniel would disappear again. But he was there, waiting at the ranger station, still wearing his modified braces, still carrying that forest-weathered look, but with something new in his eyes: hope. When Sarah saw him, she let out a sound that was barely human, a cry of pure maternal love that had been bottled up for a decade. She ran to him, and Daniel, this boy who had survived impossible odds, who had been betrayed by his father and abandoned to die, opened his arms and let his mother hold him. They stood like that for a long time. Sarah sobbing into Daniel's shoulder, Daniel quietly crying, years of pain and separation beginning to dissolve in the simple act of being together again. Marcus watched from a distance, not approaching, knowing he had no place in this reunion. But Daniel over his mother's shoulder caught Marcus's eye. The look wasn't forgiveness, might never be forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. Daniel gave a small nod, a gesture that said, "You told the truth. You brought me back to her, and maybe that's a beginning." The road ahead would be long and difficult. Daniel would need time to adjust to the modern world, to process the trauma of his abandonment and survival, to build a relationship with a mother he barely remembered. Sarah would need to help her son heal while dealing with her own grief and anger. And Marcus would have to live with the consequences of his actions, knowing that he had destroyed the most precious thing he ever had and could never truly make it right. But Daniel had survived. Against every odd, against nature and abandonment and disability, he had survived. And in that survival was a testament to human resilience, to the capacity of the human spirit to endure and overcome even the darkest betrayals. James, the homeless veteran who had saved a 5-year-old boy in the forest, who had given Daniel the tools to survive and the love to keep hoping, would never know that his legacy had brought a family back together. But his influence lived on in every step Daniel took, every choice he made, every moment of strength he displayed. As for Marcus, he would spend the rest of his life trying to earn a place in his son's world, knowing he would probably fail, but trying anyway. He had learned, far too late, that no empire was worth the price of his son's love, that true strength came not from ruthless ambition, but from choosing love even when it was difficult. The Ocala National Forest, that vast wilderness that had been Daniel's prison and his salvation, stood silent witness to all of this. The trees that had sheltered a dying child and then taught him to thrive continued to grow, indifferent to human drama. But somewhere in those woods, under a big oak tree, James rested, his sacrifice the foundation upon which a broken family might someday rebuild. And Daniel, the boy who should have died but instead learned to live, stood at the edge of the forest, looking toward a future he was finally ready to face, carrying with him the strength of survival, the wisdom of James, and the hope that even the most broken things might eventually heal. If this story moved you, don't leave without sharing it. Someone out there needs this reminder today that kindness is never weakness and compassion can rewrite a person's entire life. See you in the next story.